Daylight's question was multifaceted. She wanted to know about flowers. Which machine would you use cutting them? Which paper? How would you design flowers? Cutting thin paper, and how to use a pen for adding textures. But she referred to a post that talked about these specific flowers, so I'll show you where that was. If we go online to DIY Magic Blooming Paper Flowers, she's talking about this design, that when you start with the design folded up, and then you drop this folded up wad into water and you watch it expand in the water to open up a blossom. It's kind of fun thing to do with children. They can color the flowers and they can throw them into the water. The question is, how do you cut that thin paper, whether it's this project or whether it's any other flower project? I thought I'd show you also my favorite flower is posted for free on the Make the Cut forum. I put in the questions, I put the link for this. This is Pam's roses that she posted, and there's an MTC file there. I made these roses. They are the most beautiful flowers I ever made, and they're very easy to cut. I very rarely ever cut thin paper because I have not had a lot of success. Here's Michelle's version. If we go down to the bottom, let's see, everybody was trying these. This is thicker paper here. I had great success with this flower, even on very thick paper, and I cut them on many different machines. If we go to page 2, you'll see the style of these petals on here is this right here. And they're put together using hot glue, but they're just gorgeous. So that's my favorite flower, and I love 3D flowers. You can use all different shapes. So I'm going to go back to this particular design and show you how I would create this design. This was, they include instructions here for just folding paper and drawing your own pattern and then cutting your own with scissors. So I'm going to show you how to do that using Make the Cut and give you some tips on some special tools we have that will help draw these. But as far as cutting goes, I learned something this afternoon in playing with different paper. I started with printer paper, and I could never get this tiny little piece to cut without tearing on printer paper, no matter which settings I use. And I know many people with many different machines have experienced the same thing, and that's I have 12 machines, and I experience that problem cutting printer paper all the time. It didn't occur to me till after I was done, just before the webinar started, that wait a minute, when paper tears, no matter what machine, no matter what setting, even after I worked on the file to get rid of all the sharp corners, the paper still tore on that little piece, and I suddenly realized the truth of tearing paper is that some paper will never cut well. And that's true for your everyday generic printer paper. So I got to thinking, I wonder if I use some good crispy paper that's thin, would it work? Well, I only had one kind of paper that I know is crispy that cuts no matter what, and that's WorldWin paper. They sell paper in text weight or in cover weight, and it always cuts well no matter if it's thick or thin. So I happen to have some Vellum, this printed vellum from WorldWin, and it's very crispy, and I tried cutting my file on it, and lo and behold, I got a beautiful, beautiful cut, even of this tiny pointed little design, this little jagged thing right here inside. And it worked really well. The other thing that I tried with this was cutting with just lightweight cardstock or medium weight. It's 110 pound Georgia Pacific, its index. So it also worked very nicely on this project. It didn't tear because it's thicker, and the flowers bloomed in the water like it was supposed to. There's a little more wow factor with the vellum and the printer paper expanding, because when you fold it up it kind of stays folded, whereas when you use cardstock it starts unfolding even on the table before you ever put it in the water, because it doesn't fold up quite as tightly as the other paper. But that was my paper experience today, and if you're going to do a lot of cutting on a machine of very lightweight paper, I highly recommend you get some crispy paper. WorldWin is in Wisconsin, and they have hardwood trees, and hardwood trees make crispy paper. You bend it and it cracks instead of folding sometimes, but this vellum, it folded very nicely and made some beautiful flowers to work with here. So I'm going to show you how to create something like this and make the cut. Now in the tutorial it said to start with some circles. So I wrote down some instructions here. The first flower measures 5.5 inches, so I'm just going to start with a circle here. Type CI in the Find window to get my circle, and I'll resize it. I'm going to copy this and go to a new page. Click on Control-Shift-V to paste in place. I'm going to go up here to the top with the gold lock icon on and type in 5.5 and enter. So now I have a 5.5 inch circle to start my design with. And it would be good to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to type 4 and 3. I'm a little too close right now. But I would like to get the center of this circle right on the center of my page, and you can see that little plus in the middle of the circle. I want it to line up with the center grid lines just to make it easier for alignment purposes. Now there's another circle that I'm going to use. On the instructions it says slice halfway down. Well, that means I need a circle that's half the size. So I'm going to hold Control-Shift and click. So now I have another circle, and I'm going to resize the second circle to half of that, which is 2.75, and press Enter. Now I'm going to hold Shift and make sure both of these circles are selected and type S to stack them so they're perfectly centered here. And these are just going to be guidelines for me as I create my flowers. Now what I need to do is create some petals without being an artist and without drawing them and without going to look for petals. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a new layer, and I'm going to put in the fold lines. I'm going to create my own with the pen tool, and I'm going to put snapping on 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to click at the top, left click, and then right click at the bottom. And since I have the snapping on, it makes a nice straight line with no problem with me having to have steady hands or anything. Now I'm going to select that line that I made and turn off the snapping. And I'm going to use this tool I haven't used a lot of, but I played with it today a lot, and I think we ought to be using it more, and that is duplicate, rotated, duplicate. Now what I want to do is I want to divide this flower into 16 pieces, and I already have one, so I need 15 more. So I put 15 in here, and then I click on this little calculation tool, and it gives me those these lines that are actually I want 15, but I want them to go all the way around. And this calculates it for half a circle. So to get a whole circle, I need it to be double this number, so 22.5. And enter. Oops, I didn't want to enter. We'll do it again. We go to Edit, Duplicate, Rotated Duplicate. I want 15, and we'll make it 22.5. Now it doesn't look quite right. You see the lines are much longer than I want them to be. So I'm going to take my Y offset down to 0. Oh, look at that. It worked. I don't need an offset for X or Y. I probably only needed 7 of these. Let's see what happens if I make less. Yeah, I only needed 7 because they're all the way through. So then I can just click on Accept, and I have perfectly divided lines. Now these could serve as the fold lines, but what I'm using them for is to give me a guide for making my petals. So I'm going to add a new layer. To do that, I'm going to click on the larger of the 2 green plus icons in the lower right corner. I've got a new layer, and I'm going to use a basic shape, a triangle. So I'm going to type TR and double click on the triangle. And what I want to do is zoom in on this so that I can align this triangle, the corners of this triangle, with the intersection of that circle right here and this line. So I want the corner to go there. And then I'm going to drag this out so the corner of the triangle goes right to the intersection of the circle and this score line here. Now what I want to do is bend the side. To do that, I click on the second arrow here. If you don't see the tools on the left, click on the figure 8, and that opens our node editing toolbar. I'm going to click on the second arrow. That's the node editing tool. And I'm just going to click about in the center of this, and I'm going to drag up and out until the blue line near the bottom lines up straight with that dotted black line that you see. I'm going to do the same thing here. Go to the center and drag up until my blue line is straight. Now I have a petal. And I'm going to scroll down a little, maybe zoom out a little bit so we can see more of this circle. But I'm going to, again, do a rotate, duplicate on that petal. So I only have to do one. Oh, look, my triangle wasn't high enough. I wanted it to go all the way to the top. I'm going to left click and drag it up to the top of my circle. And if I want to change the width of that, I can still change it. You can make your petal any size you want. That looks better. Okay, so I'm going to select that petal and scroll down so I can see the bottom of my design. Because I thought this would be a real good way for us to learn about this. Duplicate, rotated duplicate. Now this is the one that I need 15 of. Do I need 15 petals? No. I think I only need 7 petals because I have one and there are 8 petals in the design. So I'm going to click again on the calculate here, and this is going to give me 7 on half the circle. So I need 45, 22 times 22 and a half doubled is 45 degrees. Oops. You know what I did? I did duplicate, but I want it rotated duplicate. Okay, so with it selected, I'm going to scroll down. Edit, duplicate, rotated duplicate. I want 7 of these. I want 45 degrees. And right now they're all up at the top. I need to move them down so I can see them down here. Right now I can't see them because the Y is at 0. If I put in 20, well, they're still too low. Maybe I put in 40. Not 20, 40. Maybe 40. So they're still not enough. Maybe 45? Well, they're getting down there. What I'm going to do is just use this down arrow until my petals, up arrow, until my petals get down to the very bottom. And what I'm looking for is this red arrow at the bottom to be lined up with the edge of that circle. I'll just keep pressing the down arrow until the point of my petal reaches the circle. Now I'm checking this over here to make sure that these lines that I drew are exactly going down the middle of the petal here, and they're here. Point of this petal is a little bit, looks like it's a little bit off, but if you want to change it to make it go right to the right or left, you would change the X. So if I do that, you see the point has moved over to the right. If I take it down, it'll move it over. So we have very fine control of where these pieces go. So when I'm happy, I'm going to click on Accept. And we'll zoom out a little bit. I still have all of my petals selected. So while they're selected, I'm just going to weld them together. I'll click on the Weld button at the bottom center of the screen. And I'll hide my circles. But it looks like they weren't touching. So I'm going to select the center circle. And I'm going to use Control, Shift, and click because I might want to use that circle again. I'm going to send one to the top and hide it. Now I don't need that outside circle anymore, so I'm just selecting it and I'm going to delete it. And I can hide all my score lines now, and I can select these and weld them. And now I have my flower. You could use this flower as is. There is, in the instructions it says to put a hole in the middle. It doesn't say how big, but I tried some different sizes of holes and found that about a 1-inch circle works. So I type in C to get my circle. I'll send that up to its own layer and select both circles and type S to stack. this circle is a score line. So I'm going to click on the score line thumbnail on the lower right side and the top circle holding the shift. Click on the smaller, the two green plus icons at the bottom of the screen to send all the score lines to their own layer, and I'm going to hide them. I have these empty layers here, so I'm going to click the trash can to get rid of those. So now I just have a circle and the flower. So I can left click, hold shift, and click on the flower, and now I can join them. Now I've got a flower with a circle in it. So if I open my score lines and, well, I see there's extra score lines. I don't need these that are between the petals. I only need the ones now that are on the petals. I needed these before just to draw my petal and to make it straight. So I'm just clicking on these and hitting the delete key. And now I have score lines on one layer. I can select all of those and join them just to keep things neat. And now I'm going to select all of this, Control Shift and drag. I'm going to resize my second flower to 3.5 inches. And very often when we're making paper flowers, we're layering different sizes. So I've typed in 3.5 with the gold lock icon and press enter, and now I have my smaller flower. And now we have a little tiny one that has double the amount of petals, and they're more like triangular ones. So I tried using stars, but they weren't quite exactly right for what I needed to do. So yeah, I need another circle for this one, and I need a triangle TR. Double click on that. The 1-inch circle is fine, that's the default. For the triangle, I want it to be 0.25 inches wide and 0.5 inches tall. Press enter. And then I need these to line up, and I also want to make sure that I'm type 4 and 3 so I can zoom in here. I want to make sure they're vertically aligned, so I'll type V and make sure that the plus here on the center of the circle is right on a grid line, because again, this will help me with my rotation. Again, I think this is really good practice for using that duplicate by rotate. I had tried wrap, but when you're doing symmetrical flowers, which I needed to have exactly the right number of petals, and they needed to be right for folding, so they all needed to be very, very even. Found this a much better solution than wrapping a triangle. So again, edit, duplicate, rotate a duplicate. Now this time, it gave me a huge, huge circle. I'm going to take this back down to 0. And I don't need 7, and I don't need 45 degrees. I wanted to wrap 15. And I'll use the calculator here to calculate what it needs to be. It says 11.25, so that would be 22.5. Enter. Oops, I did that enter thing again. Don't want to do that. Well, undo. Okay. Duplicate, rotate a duplicate. It's a good thing I have to do this many times, because then you'll get to practice as well. So notice that they're way too high. I want to make them lower, so I'm going to put in just a random number, 20. Okay, 20 is too big. So I'm going to use this down arrow, and I'm just going to hold it down until the points over here, you see these points? I want them to line up exactly on this line. And when they do, then I know I have my height correct. If I wanted to change the width, I could do that. Okay, so now I've got my points here. And I'm going to give you one more chance to watch me do that. Notice I've got an offset for Y of 18.57. Maybe this would be better with a 0. Looks like it. I'm going to accept that, but I'm going to do it again because we were talking about cutting and tearing. And the problem with having points in our design is when a blade has to pivot in a real tight corner like this, that's where tearing happens. So one of the solutions is to make round corners instead of pointed corners. So I'm going to Control Z undo, and I'm going to take this triangle and make it rounded points. I'm going to do it by doing a shadow layer and maybe doing just a 0.01. Does that round very much? Yeah, that gives me, you see, rounded. I've got corner join rounded and accept, so that now I've got, instead of sharp points, I've got a curve for my blade to go around. And again, I'm going to resize this with my gold lock icon on. I'm going to resize it to green lock icon, 0.25 and 0.5, enter. So I've got the right size, but now I've got rounded points here. And I'm going to click on both and type V so that it's aligned right. And I'm going to use my down arrow key just to make sure I want to make sure this plus is right in the middle and that both of these are lined up well enough to connect. Okay, so now with this selected again, I'm going to go to duplicate, rotated duplicate, and it remembers my settings from the last time, so I don't have to remember them. These are nicely overlapping, and I have a rounded points up here, so I'm going to click on accept, and I'm going to weld, and I'll just do a blackout. So I have a nice pointed star. I'm going to leave the circle there as a score line. Just send it to its own layer. I'll hide this so I can grab the circle and send it to its own layer. Now, one thing that I still might have a problem with is these tight little corners in here. If I zoom in really close, maybe type 6 and 3, you see that the blade really has to make a really tight turn on there. There's a couple ways that I've dealt with this to prevent tearing. I mean, you could try cutting it. If it doesn't tear, that's great, but this is a really tough shape to cut. Even with the rounded things on the outside help, but these are still square corners in there. So what I did was, and I did this for all of the shapes as well, because there's some really tight things right in here. But I'll show you on this one first. I'm just going to take this star shape and resize it with the lock on to 10%. 10% and enter. Now it got very tiny. Then I'm going to go into the wrench icon at the bottom and auto simplify path, and it reduced the node count by almost half. Now with it still selected, I'm going to go up to the top and put in 10% R to reverse it and press enter. Now we're going to zoom in really close and see what happened. Some of these curves, some of these points have disappeared. They're now curves. You see that? But some of them are still sharp. The ones that are sharp, I'm just going to left click with a node editing tool, right click, and delete the node. And look what it did. Left click, right click, delete node. And we got a nice curve in there. Left click, right click, delete node. So anyone that, I could have done this from the beginning, but sometimes it's easier when you have so many to have that simplified paths take care of it. This one could use it too. Left click, delete node. So left click on the line, right click, delete node. And now it's giving me a really nice smooth curve on all of these little points. Now if I needed precision, I wouldn't want to do this, but in this case I don't need precision as much as I need something that'll cut without tearing. So now I can zoom back in, out here, and I'll just stack these again, type S, and now I have something that I can work with. Now this center one is also a score line, so I'll send it to its own layer and hide that. The other thing that we can do is that we can create these same score lines, but I found out that we don't really need those score lines. I did it both ways. I went to all the trouble of using my embossing tool to emboss these score lines. But really, when you make these flowers, doing it the old-fashioned way, fold the flower in half, fold it in half again, and then fold it in half again. So 3 folds, they're all folded. If you did the score lines, you've got to fold them anyway. So they fold fine without score lines. So if you're going to do this, I'd recommend just hide the score lines and just go ahead and cut the designs like this. If you wanted to, you could have all the score lines on one layer, left click on the thumbnail, hold a shift and select the other score line and send them to their own layer, and right on here score lines, and get rid of the empty layers. And so these could all go on the same. They did suggest that this one be gold or yellow. I'll send it to its own layer so it can be its own color, and then the rest can be whatever color you want. I just made them off-white. These circles here get in the way, and the way to make them so they don't have color is to left click the node editing tool, click on the circle, right click, and break node. Now it looks more like score line should look. Left click, right click, break node. And I can do the same with this. Left click, right click, break node. So now you can see the color of the design, and we can go into contrast, and we can send all of the score lines to the top, and we can cut. So that's a long, involved process. I cut mine, I liked it best this way. Just cut like these and just fold in half, fold in quarters, and fold in eighths. And when you fold through the petal, right where these score lines were showing. So do we have any questions about creating these interesting blooming flowers. They're lilies, blooming lilies. They say this is a really nice project for children. The first time you put them in water, they bloom nicely, but they say after they dry, you can do them again and they'll work even better. But mine haven't dried yet, so I can't speak to that. But I did this on that vellum, the printed floral pattern of vellum. They turned out beautiful. I'll have to take pictures of them. Also did not have the wooden bead or the recommended washer, so I just found a little metal brad that worked fine.